Welcome to an open conversation with Mark and Monica Neubauer. I'm Monica.
And I'm Mark.
All right. Well, what are we going to talk about today, Mark?
We are going to start our faith journey story.
I'm a little nervous.
What makes you nervous about it?
Because when you tell parts of your story that you haven't really told to everybody, I mean, I have parts of my story that I tell all the time, and I'm a really open book, but this is not a story that I tell all the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just that next level for me.
Are you afraid of the cancel culture we live in?
Am I afraid of the cancel culture we live in?
Like you're going to say something about your faith journey and you're going to be canceled by certain people?
Just so y'all know, this conversation is unprepared. So we did not practice this. Okay.
We haven't really practiced any of them. I think that's what makes them kind of good and real.
Well, and that's also just kind of as an FYI, we have rearranged our mics. Our video is either going to be a little weirder to watch. We've arranged our mics so we can look at each other and make it more that way.
Well, it's hard for me to concentrate on looking straight and,
looking at the camera. And
I just naturally going to look to the person talking to me. And if you're talking to me, so it's challenging.
Yeah.
A little bit easier this way.
Okay. Cancel culture. Well, I think the cancel culture is part of why we're doing this, because the cancel culture is unforgiving and doesn't take into account people's whole stories.
Right.
So if we get canceled, that suggests that people aren't willing to hear your whole story.
Well, and if you get canceled, it's because they took something you said out of context. That's really bottom line.
Well, largely, I'd say largely that's true, but sometimes people really need to be canceled and they just kind of got caught. Or something needs to change. This is not an episode about cancel culture. We'll talk about that another time. Let's just say that when you share your full story, inevitably somebody's going to find something about what you're sharing that they don't like, or it rubs them the wrong way.
Right.
And that's part of what an open conversation is if we're not willing for people, if we're not willing to have the conversations and say and listen, then there's not going to be a change in the divisiveness of our culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that being said, it's always a little nerve-wracking to share more of your story that makes you more vulnerable to public scrutiny.
Right.
So let's just leave that. Yeah. Let's just leave that there. We've already decided we're willing to share it. So
we have more to say about that as we go on.
Well, anyway, we'll get there. This section, we honestly feel like it's probably going to be 4 to 6 to 7 episodes. This is going to be a lengthy thing because there's a lot of what we want to share. And the reason we want to share our faith journey is because there is so much conversation going on. We were raised in the Christian community, and that's going to be the basis from which we tell our story. And there's so much conversation and hurt and lots of things going on talking about it, change in perspective. And some people like it and some people don't like it, but there aren't a lot of people talking about it. And we want to just be another voice in the story for people to consider when they're looking at their own story. Yeah. Okay.
That's really, honestly, I think that was one of the primary motivations for us to even start
this podcast
at this time.
Yeah.
Because we just run into too many, especially young believers who are struggling with their faith and not knowing where to go and what to do and how to process and
where to find good information, who can I talk to, who can I learn from?
Right.
I don't know what questions to ask.
Right.
I know I feel this way. Right. I know I don't like this.
Yeah.
And honestly, when people want to reference the scripture, the Bible, it's hard to say, I need an answer and I'm willing to look for it in the Bible. And we'll talk about the Bible and how, that as well, but I'm willing to look for answers in the Bible, but it's very difficult. The Bible is not just a prop open answer book.
Yeah.
So the answers aren't, I'm not going to say they're not there because that's not That's
Well,
not true.
You're delving into a whole section.
I know. You're getting ahead. So see, these are the things that we're going to talk about, though. You're getting a little bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
We will talk about the Bible because we do have, as part of our young life, some Bible training.
Yeah.
So we have some sense of the context of things. So yes, we will have a whole episode talking about the Bible. Today, though, we're going to talk about our story and kind of how we began in this place, right?
Right.
Do you want to start? How would you like to start?
Well, I think I can't remember a time when I didn't ask a lot of questions. Since the beginning of my faith journey, I've just asked questions. Why? I just asked why. It just seems like a simple thing to do, but why would God do this? Why do we do this? Why, all these questions. And I remember really wrestling just as a literally brand new believer.
When you say believer, what do you mean?
When I finally came to a place where I said, okay, I believe in this Jesus story. I believe in that I want to follow Christ, that I want a new life in Jesus. That, when I started that journey, the questions just started coming in floods. And
so you were willing to become a follower of Jesus without having the answers to your questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And why did you decide to do that?
Well, at some point you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So
especially when you're young, you think you know so much, and as you grow, you know a lot, but you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I literally started it with just, faith and
you knew you needed to walk with God.
I needed something different. I knew that my life wasn't working as it was. And through Christ, it seemed to provide a lot of at least initial answers for, where to start.
Yeah.
And so I remember having a lot of these questions, and went to a pastor of a church that I was going to at the time, North Park.
We don't need to be so specific.
Anyway, Dan Lasich. And
so you're going to compliment him. If you're going to say somebody's name, you need to say something nice.
Absolutely. I love Dan. Dan's a great guy. But I've had all these questions, and I came to I had like a list of 6 questions that I was wrestling through. He goes, hold on a minute. He runs into his office. He reaches into his desk drawer. He pulls out a yellow pad. He goes, just about every question that I get answered, 3 more get written down. There was just pages after pages of questions that he had.
Right.
So I was like,
so you didn't awaken, but you gave him. You said, I have all these questions, and he says, you know what? I have these questions too.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
is really great, because not everybody allows that they have so many questions. I think that's one of the struggles here, is that is it okay to ask the questions? Right.
Well, and I think I got to throw this in there, because I know we were talking about but it's just a quote. I won't say the name of the person then, since you don't want me to get into that quite just yet. But he said, the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty.
The opposite of faith is certainty. Because faith is believing in something you can't see.
And
or you don't know for sure.
That you're just trusting, you're the fundamental core or foundation stone of a relationship with God is trust. It's not, do I believe the correct things about, whatever, this correct doctrines, the correct theology. It's not about the correctness. It's about trusting. Fundamentally, do I just trust God? And that's really was.
And whose books did you get that from?
That was Peter Enns.
Peter Enns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The Sin of Certainty is the name of the book. So.
We don't want to focus too much on the resources at the beginning, but occasionally they'll come up.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were with Dan, and you were asking all these questions, and Dan said, yep, I get it.
Yep. Yeah. You've come to the right place. If you like questions, become a Christian.
Well, that was a good start for you, though, because if you had all these questions and he could say, yes, he didn't harass you for having a bunch of questions or anything like that.
No, it was perfect. I think what he was trying to express was it's absolutely okay to have questions. And I think there's something else that he was getting at, and this is goes into some of the neuroscience, but that is one of the things that the church, I'm going to always say the church.
And when you reference the church, you generally mean the American church.
Generally, yes.
Yeah. Because we will talk about international context.
I would say, though, that probably because this is a fundamental problem with all of humanity, that is probably true in other churches around the world. It's probably globally true. And that is that when we ask a question in, say, especially a faith setting, people are quick to give you an answer, even if it's the wrong answer, because if there's one answer that they seem to dislike giving is, I don't know, and I think that was one of the things that Dan was comfortable with. Yeah. And so many faith leaders are not comfortable with that. They're not comfortable with just saying, you know what, I don't know, and we'll go into the neuroscience of that answer later, but I'd rather hear I don't know than hear a answer that did not help, or a platitude that
totally. Can we all say, yes, we all dislike platitudes or canned responses that don't actually talk to what's going on in our hearts?
I think some people like platitudes, to be honest. If I'm honest. And the reason is that, you and I wish that we were a little bit more average. I wish that more people, when they deconstructed their faith, they were doing it in the hopes of reconstructing it. But I think by and large, either they don't know how, or they don't know where to go to find answers, or they just give up on the faith instead of deconstructing in order to reconstruct.
Okay, let me talk about what you're talking about.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I like to do in a conversation when I'm doing it for other people, is sometimes people say things that I'm thinking, I know the audience may not know what he's saying.
Yeah.
And you're talking about deconstructing your faith and reconstructing your faith. Mm-hmm. And that comes from, and we're going to dig into our story still here, that comes from us recognizing that there were things in the faith that we grew up with and that we started with that we ended up not agreeing with.
Yeah.
And so we said, my faith as I have it right now is not, I don't agree with it anymore.
I would say that if the reality that I'm experiencing is different than what I was taught to believe it would be,
and what I did believe it would be,
then that creates a state of cognitive dissonance in the brain, and we got to wrestle with it. We have to jump in and.
Okay, you know the word cognitive dissonance, and I'm going to need to encourage you to use other words, because as many times as you and I have talked about that, it still doesn't have, it's one of those things that let's use a
simpler word. It doesn't settle quickly.
It doesn't settle quickly, and it doesn't fill into a space where I automatically know what you mean.
Yeah.
So when we're following a faith where things are not appearing to manifest in the way we expected them to manifest, that creates a disconnect. Let's use that word instead. Mm-hmm. It creates a disconnect in my brain, and I don't like that feeling. Yeah. Right. Okay.
And it creates questions in the brain. So, neurologically, those questions create a stress response. Like the human brain does not like, I don't know, as an answer. When you ask somebody a question and they say, I don't know, it literally puts your brain into a stress response.
Well, I completely see that. We talk about that in real estate context, just to kind of give a business response or comparison to that, is when people list a house, if they live in a space where they say, oh, well, the buyer can figure it out, or the buyer will take care of that. Well, a buyer may not buy a house if they don't understand what's going on. Yeah. Even if there's a big problem, they would rather buy it understanding the problem than buy it in a place where they don't understand. Yeah. So get a quote, be clear about it, be upfront.
Get an inspection done.
Whatever. Yeah. Okay, so let's backpedal.
Yeah.
So,
All right, back to the origins, the international faith community. Now
well, no, we haven't gotten there. Okay. So that you walked into your faith with those questions and you continued in your faith.
Yeah.
Okay. I entered in my faith having been growing up in a church, but just not quite feeling that this was all there was. And then I did, I'm going to use the phrase, meet Jesus in a more intimate way. I mean, I really felt his presence and I felt like he revealed himself to me. And I said, yeah, wow, I feel new. I think that phrase born again is a real thing because I felt very new and clean and excited to walk in this relationship with Jesus. And I was 16 and continued to grow in my belief of Jesus and even in the experience of him and my youth. And I think yours was too. Both of us went to churches that were very energetic and people were very authentic and in a lot of respects, even very open that maybe we don't know everything, but here's what we know. And we both had opportunities to be in a more experiential environment.
Yeah.
And we can get into that later or not, but it was a sense of where we believed in the power of the Spirit. And there were things going on that felt supernatural.
Yeah.
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 So our belief in God was not just in our mind, it was something we felt experientially.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, literally at times, physically. I mean, I remember going into some worship services where I didn't know anybody and just walking into the church and literally the hair on my body would just stand up. Like, holy cow, what's going on in here? Like, this is electric.
Electric,
yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I would say
and experience that
often. Yeah. And I would say for myself, one of the biggest blessings and most intimate times for me in my relationship with God and with Jesus was when I have a large personality and I speak before I think. And when I was young, I really did that a lot. I've learned to not do that quite as much now, but I would speak or I would do things and I would feel bad about it. It was either wrong or it maybe wasn't wrong, but I just felt bad about it. I didn't like how it came across. I felt like I hurt somebody.
Yeah.
I felt like I hurt myself, whatever I had done.
Yeah.
And I really felt when I would go back to God and talk to him about it, I felt forgiven.
Yeah.
I felt loved. I felt genuinely accepted by God.
Yeah.
And that would happen for me in a church environment, primarily in a church environment, but even also as in some of the communities that we later joined with.
Yeah.
So our faith as young people was very, very real, very powerful, and very comforting.
Yeah.
Any other words?
No, I think that I think your point is it wasn't just based on
what some people said. It was very experiential.
It was visceral. It was real. It was something,
that provided joy and beauty and peace.
Yeah.
In my.
It continues to be so, but it's shaped.
It looks different.
It looks different. Feels a little different. It's just like your body feels different as you age.
Your face feels different too, right?
Well, that's true.
Well, it is true. Well, that's probably another part of what we want to be sharing is, this is a story over decades.
Yeah.
Well, so we wanted to share that just to let people know that our faith beginnings were based on more than just we grew up in this environment and therefore we believe it.
Or I felt pressured at some revival meeting, it wasn't
like that. We made our own choice and we felt the power of God, and it was a very real environment.
Yeah.
I mean, a very real feeling, and it provided us with great joy and peace.
Yeah.
So that was the origin, and that was good. And we grew in that, and we did join various churches, and we were strong in faith communities here in America. And
Yeah.
And then we met.
Yeah, we met.
We'll do another episode about how we met, but both of our stories of how we met were very supernatural. So they contributed into that further faith, firming up our faith, how we both came to Nashville. I came back. I grew up in Franklin, Tennessee, and I was living in New York City at the time, and I came back, and Mark had moved here from Pittsburgh. So we were both in Nashville. We met, and what we were most drawn to in each other was that faith journey, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the core of what we both wanted.
Yeah.
That's how passionate we were about our faith.
Yeah.
And even then we would ask questions. You were a big Bible. It's kind of interesting because Mark and I have very different.
Bible thumper? Did I try to hit you with a Bible?
Your Bible was big.
I was so attracted. He had such a large Bible.
I remember your Bible and you carried it around a lot even then. And I remember you in my car, and you were such a student of the Bible even then.
That's funny.
Mark and I have very different intellectual pursuits. Mine are very centered in business and in personality profiles and in relationship direction. And Mark's pursuit, we won't tell what our Enneagram profiles are yet. If y'all can figure them out, if that's something that you like. But Mark's pursuits are different, and he has always pursued the whys in the Bible. So you've always been searching for things in the Bible.
Yeah.
So you brought your big Bible into our relationship.
Right.
Yep. And your big faith.
Yeah.
And faith was important to me. So we were attracted to each other, got married. We met in, I guess, May, and ended up being married the next April. So it went quick.
Yeah, it went quick.
And there were a lot of supernatural things in our story towards getting married. So we felt very comfortable that this was something, that our relationship was what God had for us.
Yeah.
And at the time, and many of you have this as part of your story too, when you get married, you definitely want to feel like God's leading you to somebody who's going to be the right person.
Yeah.
We all want that. We want so much to be married to the right person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we got married because we felt like the core things were important. And then we just said, okay, God, we trust you for the rest.
Yeah.
Pretty much, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Maybe.
How much did we have in the bank when we got married? Like $870.
I think, and that was what you spent on our honeymoon. We didn't marry each other for the money.
So the faith journey was a little bit more than the spiritual one.
Yeah, we were both working. I mean, I did have a little bit of a job.
Dad let me marry you. Jeez.
And he was so glad
I
for you to
know.
marry me.
I
was kind of a handful.
I want to say this. Yeah. It did worry me a little bit on our wedding day. The sense of relief on your dad's face had me a little worried.
You didn't notice it that day. You must have noticed it, thought about it afterwards. My dad was visibly relieved on our wedding day. He was very glad to turn me over to somebody else, whatever that meant in his culture, in his
Tag
mind.
you in.
Tag you in.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. So our faith was central. We went to church in Nashville. We went to an amazing church in Nashville,
Yeah.
and had really an ongoing tremendous experience. And
Father Don.
Don Finto.
He's not a father in the Catholic Church, but a lot of people call him Papa Don. So
Yeah, because he's just been
he's a
such
spiritual father to a lot of people.
to a lot of people, and he was to us, and he married us,
Yeah.
and it was a very
Yeah.
very good time. It was a very good time. And in our journey, we were both self-employed. We were very passionate about our faith, and we decided we wanted to take it a little bit further and get some training and see where our journey would take us.
Right.
So we moved into different spiritual communities.
Right. Yeah.
And when did we start learning?
First school was a basic discipleship training school. So people who understand that can figure that one out. And it really was that. It was
How to go deeper in your faith, learn more about the Bible, learn more about relationship with God.
And I think even more so was to learn how to function in a faith community team, how to be part of a team.
Yeah.
And that was, that was the unwritten curriculum, I think, that we learned.
Because it was very topical. Yeah. And it was very topical. I mean, we learned about relationships. We learned about the spiritual world. We learned how to study the Bible. A lot of really great things.
Oh, there's things that, I think about all the time. Yeah. I remember a lot from those times at school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything specific that you learned there that?
Oh, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, how does it go? Is the enemy distracts us with manyness and muchness.
Oh, yes.
It's not that if the primary goal of your faith is to be in relationship with God, then to be constantly distracted with manyness and muchness is a wonderful strategy to keep you from doing that. So
yeah,
I've been thinking about that a lot lately.
Well, even if you put that into the context, what some people have grown to think of as a meditation time period, just having that time of quiet where you're undistracted and you're breathing deeply and pondering the cosmos, if you will.
Literally that. I mean, so one of the things that in the context that I've been thinking about it too, is that I've been thinking about the differences, say, between the very early church and even prior to Jesus, how people got to know God, and like David, who would be a shepherd, and literally be outside in the fields with his sheep,
thinking
day and night, just thinking.
He didn't have a Kindle. He didn't have an iPhone.
And observing.
He didn't
creation.
have books.
Yeah.
Yeah. He observed the stars.
Yeah.
He smelled the smells.
Yeah. And we could go fast forward, to us today with the internet in our pocket.
Yeah.
The
information of the world in our pocket.
Literally, and the difference that makes. And I think that is primarily a cause for a lot of people's faith struggle is we've got too much information to process. We've got too much to consider. And
All right. So that was a really powerful time for us. And we were just full-time learning. We were taking classes, we were processing, we were working, and we were in a faith environment where that's what everybody was there to do. We all believed in the purpose that was our life, was to encourage each other, was to understand God. And it really felt like the scripture, I can't think of the address, but the world will know that you are believers by how well you love each other.
Yeah.
And we were really loving each other in that community. And there were struggles, there was relationship things, but we worked through them. We talked through them. We had kind, gracious leaders who cared about us. I mean, it was just a really generous, rich time. And, when you look back on our story, this is kind of interesting. I'm thinking of this as we will be moving into areas that we were hurt in, that were frustrated, that caused us hurt, not just by people, but we felt hurt by God. And we're going to move into that, but it's kind of cool to talk about the beginnings like that and remember how real it was and how powerful it was. And some of the just amazingly beautiful, faithful, precious people that we had in our lives at that point. And, we're still friends with a lot of these people on Facebook, but not in real life.
Yeah.
Not one of them is moving though to Nashville. We'll see how that goes. So, I know, right? So we look forward to, seeing some of them, just, we've all gone through so many journeys, but that was such a precious time together.
Yeah.
And it just was very exciting. We were all generous. We wanted to give and share. We felt the power of God. And so it built a strong foundation of believing that God is real and we are walking with him and we want to give him our lives. Yeah. Well, we kept walking in these international faith communities. So we also had some pretty extensive Bible training, spent 9 months, literally.
Bible boot camp.
Yep. Taking it apart, studying it, making charts about it, letting the text talk to us.
Yeah.
Learning history, learning context, which is so huge. So it was such a great time then. And we're still in these faith communities. And here's one of the things, we're going to keep talking about the communities that we went into, but we moved into international communities. And that was a huge impact for us because we left the American church environment.
Yes. Yeah, cannot overstate that.
And even when I talk about, and now in my real estate situation, I teach a class called At Home with Diversity. And one of the things that if people have not left the country and spent time with and observed other cultures, we do not, and I mean, this is probably worldwide. I mean, if you live in China and you've never left China, you don't understand how different Americans are. And if you're American, you don't understand how different Chinese think. That when you get in other cultures around the world, they think so differently. Some of them are so differently, and some of them are just different.
Yeah.
So being exposed not only to international travels, but also to these international communities where you had to work through relationship and you had to work through and understand culture in order to get to the heart of something.
Right. Constantly had to distill down your faith, your practice, everything.
Your personality.
Yeah, your personality. You're constantly going down to the least common denominators of everything and building from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you understood culture, it's kind of like in America, we do a lot with personality types and other things that we learn about each other. But culture is a similar thing. People of a similar culture speak the same language, not just English or French or Chinese or whatever, but there's an understanding of expectation.
Yes.
We talk about that also in generational differences. It's a similarity of culture that creates a language. So we could go into a situation and we would meet somebody who was Swiss or German or Filipino or whatever. And we began to understand some of the cultural things about their country and their national culture. And we could say, oh, okay, they're doing that. That's part of their culture. And then it also would give us grace for them and grace for us. They would say, oh, well, they're American, they're brash and whatever, things that we are. And it helped us to be kind to each other because we recognized we came from different cultures. We came from different practices.
Yeah. Everybody was in the same boat. Everybody was having to distill down there.
Right. I mean, we've lived with people from, probably 20 different countries. Yeah. All over the world. And some of the people that we were living with not only came from their country of origin, but they may have lived in 2 or 3 other countries. We have one friend, he's passed away, but he is an African-American man who spent a lot of time in Brazil. So he had a lot of the Brazilian culture. And then he was living in another country and they wouldn't even let him be American. You're African.
Yeah.
Well, no, I've never even been to Africa. So that was his, cultural, historical origin, but it's not his culture. So even in ourselves, we begin, like my mother was Swedish. So I have you can see my Swedish mug here in my coffee. You don't have one, you have a Nashville mug. Well, that's also Nashville's part of our culture. So, I have Swedish origin. So I have a lot of Swedish habits in my culture, and Mark's family has more German origin. So you have some German things. So that's another conversation to talk about, going back to your origins. But we have these things and we have to look behind them. So that was our first foray into giving people grace and space because they thought different from us. This is before we had any understanding of personality profiles or any of those things. We learned international cultural differences. That was our first understanding of cultural differences. And before that, I had no idea what is a cultural difference. What is culture?
We don't even, if you've only grown up in one culture, you're not even aware of how the expectations of that culture, you just do them automatically. It's just,
that's your normal.
It's your norm. It's actually one of the things that I loved about living in an international space is that, like, kind of like what you just said, you don't have to conform to the culture that you're brought up in, and the culture that you're in, they give you grace because you're not part of that culture. So,
They give you extra space.
It's really a wonderful feeling.
There is some blessing to being a foreigner in another country. I know we have a lot of people come to America and they don't necessarily feel as comfortable being their nationality in America, but being an American in other countries, because our country's so well known, there is a certain grace there. And with some people just say, no. Okay, so we were living in these international communities, and that was creating for us a constant need to ask why. And in our faith in particular, to get back to the subject, I mean, we learned so much in those environments, but to get back in particular to the faith element, we kept having to say with our other friends who were came from other countries, when I'm looking at a church environment and I want to worship God, I can't lean on my culture. I don't want to bring the American church to that country, I don't want to tell a German person that they need to worship God the way that I worship God in America. And yet that's where I learned to worship God. So I certainly have certain ideas about what that means. But the German person is going to worship God differently. The Filipino person is going to worship God differently. The Kiwi, the Chinese, they have different elements or different things in their culture. Tell the story about the square building and the round building.
Oh, that's from Bruchko.
Yeah, a story about Bruchko. Some people were living overseas, and
he's not overseas. He was in, it is technically.
Overseas from America, but he was living in a village.
America. And he was traveling he was called to a certain people group, and on his way there, he had to go by river, the Aranco River, I think, and and
details aren't important.
And on his way there, he stopped at this one little village, and he saw like a church building there, and there's like, two people walking around the compound. And so he starts questioning the local people, said, why does nobody, go to this church? And they said, well, that the pastor there's crazy. And he's like, well, why is he crazy? He said, well, he put God in a square building. Everybody knows that round is perfect. Seriously?
I know, right? It's so obvious. If a culture thinks that round is perfect, why would you put God in a square building?
Yeah, tear down the building.
Yeah, build a round one. It sounds like an easy fix.
No, actually, this is how we've done it before. This has worked in America. It'll work here.
Yeah. Wear me out. Yeah. So those were the kinds of cultural things that we were exposed to of why would you put God in a square box when the culture says that round is perfect? Anyway, those were such great eye-opening situations that caused us to understand that there was a whole lot we didn't know. And the filters that we looked through to form our opinions about God and relationship and business were not necessarily the best or the only way. Certainly not the only way. And best, again, is culturally subjective.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So when we would meet in those, one of the conversations that we had with some of our friends was, we wanted to have a gathering, a worship gathering
Yeah.
that was as neutral
as possible.
as possible. And what did people expect from a gathering, a worship gathering? You know,
Well, I love this story because it, you know, you fast forward it to church today, and you just really begin to question things. Anyway, so, you know, we come from American church. What do we call it? The 3-1-2. 3 worship songs, one message, and 2 more worship songs at the end, and you're done.
And somewhere there you have announcements of giving, right?
Yeah. How many churches have you been to? The 3-1-2 model. Anyway, so I'm saying, you know, what I'm willing to throw out anything. You know, I'm willing to start from scratch. You know, we would normally gather together, and we would sit and we would just talk about our weeks and have coffee, and you know, maybe somebody brought some cookies or something like that, and we would just sit and talk. And you know, as I was saying, you know, I'm willing to just completely rebuild this from scratch. You know,
so we're having coffee and we're having great sharing and conversation together, and then somebody say, well, I guess we need to sing, or somebody prepared a word to bring and they felt like they wanted to bring it because they prepared it. And so that it started.
What it was, I had said,
we're gonna do a conversation on memory too, by the way.
But I remember saying, I'm willing to, you know, we don't have to do the coffee and the talk at the beginning, you know.
Yeah.
And
is that what you said?
Yeah. And
when you know the end of the story, you'll see how funny that is.
Basically, I learned
what was really important about church.
Literally, the most important thing about getting together was that it was literally the act of getting together and sharing stories and sharing our lives and checking in with each other and seeing how you're doing and
having
talking
coffee
about the week and talking.
No, and coffee.
Yeah, and coffee. Coffee was a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was the talking, and of course, you know, maybe some people had tea, but every culture had its own. You know, our Aussie friends would say, "Oh, I'm going to have a cuppa," and in Sweden they say, "Oh, we have to have a fika."
Yeah.
Every culture has things that center around coffee. Mm-hmm. It's a warm beverage. There's conversation or tea. Mm-hmm. And so the warm beverage and the coffee break or the tea break always connoted some kind of relaxation and conversation. Yeah. So the coffee whip, yes, everybody wanted to do the
literally was not expecting that at all.
Yeah.
It literally turned out to be the most important part of the week, even for a lot of these people. So, anyway,
it was. And so if we didn't sing or we didn't have a word, it didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
People walked out, they felt encouraged.
Yeah.
We would pray for each other and encourage each other. Yeah. And that was what we needed. What we wanted was the companionship. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of, based on that, when we came home, Mark did a study on the word companionship, and it was company.
Yeah,
with bread. Yeah. Companionship goes with eating and drinking. And Mark's family had a thing on the wall in German.
Yeah.
What was it?
I can't remember how it said.
Good Essen, good drinking.
Brings body and soul together.
Yeah. So it was about good food, drink, companionship. And I think we need to revisit that a little bit. That's kind of was so important to us then. And it always has been. But of course, now with the pandemic and, you know, we are looking to rebuild our community in some new ways and things. So, well, maybe we'll let you in on that conversation when we have it.
Start a church, just call it coffee.
Coffee. Well, let's call it coffee.
Coffee in Christ.
Coffee in Christ. I don't know. That might still have some.
You probably Google it. I guarantee it's something talking about it.
The core of what's important: coffee in Christ. All right, I think it's about time to wrap up this episode of An Open Conversation with Mark and Monica. Yeah. Do you have a final thought about what we've been talking about, or anything to wrap it up? I think it's a good stopping point for us.
No, I think everything can be
pretty much summed up there. Is that we formed our core need and desire to be open for change and to ask questions because of our extensive time with all these
Maybe that would be
international
it.
people.
Just-
That would be it. Yeah. Our international,
Never stop asking questions.
never stop asking questions. And if it's not been your habit,
Yeah.
then start asking a few more questions
Yeah.
and maybe feel comfortable with not knowing the answers.
Yes.
All
Get
right.
comfortable with it.
Get comfortable with not knowing the answers. All right. I'm Monica,
And Mark.
and this is an open conversation with Mark and Monica. We'll see you next time.